So we were wrapping up in part 3. We were wrapping up the last of the Jewish question, and I was talking about the final solution. And in the last few months, they were just sending everybody to the crematoriums and trying to get rid of any of the evidence of what had been going on at the concentration camps. And I wanted to make sure that I finished that sentence. Just because when the concentration camps are liberated, they do find evidence that that was the final solution. Alright, so World War II notes, Part 4, other regions of the Atlantic or the European theater, North Africa and the Balkans. It's important here to note that Rommel is the Desert Fox. He's the one that is taking over North Africa for Hitler, and then they're eventually going to be Rommel and the Desert Fox is eventually going to be pushed back by the British, but he originally has to go in there, and he's going to have to actually bail out Mussolini, as we saw in the video. Mussolini just feels like he's got to invade Ethiopia to get the supply lines open and to basically claim that he can go in and get territory, and Rommel has to go in and bail him out because he can't quite pull it off. Whenever we have the takeover of the Balkan state, it's going to violate that pact again with Russia. That was a part of the non-aggression pact with them. So again, we see them violating promises, Hitler going back on promises that he'd made to Russia. Out in the Pacific is when we finally get into the Japanese part of the war, the Pacific theater. Japan invades Indochina, and so the U.S. is going to issue sanctions. Then Japan is going to enter a pact with Rome and Berlin, essentially signing on with the Axis powers. And then, of course, we all know what happens in December when Pearl Harbor is bombed, and the United States gets into the war. They thought that this show of force would keep the United States neutral. They thought that it would take the United States out of the equation, but of course, it did exactly the opposite. It is also important to note here that the United States, while it had went isolationist after World War I, had not been isolationist in the true sense of the word. They were not neutral in the true sense of the word. They'd been sending and helping out the Allies for almost a full year before the war. So U.S. is going to declare war on Japan after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And this, of course, this is a day that will live in infamy speech as Roosevelt asks Congress to declare war, because again, it's important to remember here, President doesn't declare war, the United States Congress does, and so when when the United States declares war on Japan, that requires Germany to declare war on the United States, because again, of that alliance system. You want to take a moment to take a look back at this slide, take a look at the quick review of Japanese history. We had talked about how the United States was starting to invade their territory and get into their economic sphere of influence over in Asia prior to World War I. After World War I, when the economies are not doing so well, the Japanese are also impacted, and so they claim that going in invading these places, invading Manchuria, Indonesia, etc., that it's empire building, that this is going to help their economy. So they withdraw from the League of Nations, they get into the war with Germany, and sign an alliance with Germany. And you do want to take a moment, look back at your reading that you have, and look back at the notes, any notes prior from Crash Course or otherwise, on the invasion of China and the rape of Nanjing. Okay, so as the Allies fought in Japan and in the Pacific, the Germans and the Italians in Africa, we also got the Manhattan Project that is being worked on. And of course, the Manhattan Project is where they're developing nuclear weapons. So finally, the United States and Britain began the offensive in Italy. So they're actually going to hit what they think is the weakest link. They're going to start down at the tip of the boot of Italy and work their way up. And it's kind of interesting here to see because we know that Italy had, as an Axis power, that at this point of the war, Mussolini thought that he was controlling Hitler in the beginning. He was the first fascist, the first world-known fascist anyway, and the first leader. And then Hitler comes in, he's all friendly, and then Hitler eventually makes Mussolini his puppet. And Mussolini is at the mercy of Hitler. Hitler's telling him what to do. Hitler is telling him to be more anti-Semitic and engage in anti-Semitic policies. And so, Mussolini basically loses control and is just there in name only. And so the United States start to invade from the south. And there's actually in the presentation Miss Jessup gave where she's talking about the artwork that goes along with the Monuments Men. The artwork that's being transported all over these territories. There's a lot of artwork in Italy. There were some Italian trucks that literally, when they find out that the territories that the war is over, Italy has been taken over by the United States, they just get out of the trucks and they leave them on the side of the streets. And so along come the American soldiers, and they see all these trucks with all this artwork, and they're like, okay. And they eventually, take the trucks, turn it back around, and return the art. So the United States is going to invade through the bottom part of Italy and the southern part of Italy and work their way north. We also have the storming of Normandy and D-Day in France so they can help liberate France. The Red Army is going to defeat the Germans at Stalingrad in 42 and then just work their way towards the west. Work their way west for the next 3 years. Hitler, realizing the end, of course, commits suicide in the Eagle's Nest with his mistress, Eva Braun. You want to take a look in the reading at the Battle of Midway and how it's going to cripple Japan. Again, this is their territory where they can do the island hopping, and they can refuel halfway out in the middle of the ocean there between the United States and Japan. The war does drag on with Japan for a few more months. The war is over in June for World War I as far as the European nations, and of course it doesn't actually end until August with Japan and the United States. The Japanese are going to refuse to surrender, and as we all know the story goes, President Truman is going to make that fateful decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. It's also important to kind of take note of the timeline here that Roosevelt is actually going to suffer a stroke before the end of the war, and Truman is going to take over. And when we start talking about the Cold War and we get into the difference between the Yalta Conference and Potsdam Conference and all these other conferences where the leaders are meeting to decide the fate of Germany at the end of World War I. You got Roosevelt, who's there originally, and then Truman's going to take over, and that attitude and the relationship between Truman and Stalin is what's going to lead us up into World War with the next unit. So the atomic bomb is dropped in 1945, first on Hiroshima, or as some people say, Hiroshima. Either way is perfectly acceptable. Japan refuses to surrender. They had told the emperor, we're going to drop this bomb. If you surrender now, we won't drop it, everything will be alright. And of course Japan refuses, and interestingly enough, they sent the bomb over there on an airplane, not honestly knowing what was going to happen when it fell. The technology was new, they had no idea if it would actually explode, even though they'd run tests. And so they send the bomb over, and it does explode. So again, they say, listen, we're going to drop this bomb, or you can surrender now. And that's, of course, on Nagasaki. And after the bomb is finally dropped on Nagasaki, they surrender, but not before. Okay, you can look at some pretty neat atomic bomb pictures. Of course, I'm referring to the one on the left. Nothing neat about the one on the right. The mushroom cloud is pretty iconic of the atomic bomb. And of course, the devastating after effects. The people who are immediately eradicated, the ones in the outer zones who lived through, and then of course the ones who die immediately or over long term because of radiation poisoning, cancer. Three important turning points of the war is one, the Battle of Britain, the United States entering the war, and then three, Russia being invaded by Germany. Hopefully, at this point, you can discuss why these are turning points. So just take a moment really quickly, maybe out to the side, write down what you think, why you think these were turning points of the war. Consequences. The Holocaust, of course, is revealed. We start to realize just what was going on behind the scenes in Germany and in the areas that Hitler had taken over, and what was going on in these concentration camps. The peace settlement is going to be made by the United States and the Soviet Union. They're going to become superpowers at this point. The United States and the Soviet Union, they pretty much drive the peace settlement. Of course, Churchill is in on the negotiations. Europe is torn to shreds, and we'll talk about the Marshall Plan here in just a moment. The decline of colonialism after World War II, a lot of the colonial powers start to disband. You're going to see a big push in the 1950s for India to become free. France is going to have to give up its territory in Vietnam because it's just so economically challenged on its own that it can't uphold and it can't bear the weight and the responsibility of having colonies. And of course, they're also having to fight off Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. We'll talk more about that as we get into World War II. And so they're going to leave the Vietnam Indo-China territory and leave it to its own devices. Changes for women. It is extremely important that you take a look at the Women in AP Euro handout at this point so that you can see we know that the women go to the factories. You've got Rosie the Riveter. They're a big push, a big help in the women's auxiliary. They are helping out in the factories, taking over where the men left off, and we've actually got a lot of wartime movies and wartime iconography from this time period. There's a movie that has Madonna, Rosie O'Donnell, and Gina Davis in it called A League of Their Own, where the female baseball leagues take over because there are no boys of summer. There are only women, no male baseball leagues, and the people back home still wanted a slice of, apple pie and baseball. So that big feel for American patriotism, the women went to the baseball diamonds to help out. Side note on the movie A League of Her Own, it was actually filmed in the town that I'm from, Evansville, Indiana. There's a stadium we have there called Bosse Field, and even today I went, look at this, it was I guess last summer, went to a baseball game there. We've got our little, it's not even AAA team, it's the next one down or something like that. We have our own little baseball team that tours there, and they use Bosse Field to this day. And it says the Bosse Field was used as the team for Racine. I can't remember the name of the mascot. But if you go to a baseball game there, even today, they dress up in the uniforms from the movie, so that you can, still get a feel for that League of Their Own movie. It's a little bit of a claim to fame for the town of Evansville, Indiana. But when the men come back, of course, they're going to want their jobs back. And so we actually see, even though we've went through the militant, and this is more U.S. Than anything else, even though we've went through that militant stage of the women need to get their rights, and they got their voting rights, and women are given the right to vote in the United States with the 19th Amendment, 1919, you've got women staying home, going back to the home and getting out of the workforce, but having had a taste of it, it really breeds some resentment. Some ladies go home peacefully and stay there. Others, of course, are going to make a move and a push to get back into the factories, get back into work, and this is where we get into more of a modern day women's rights situation. Creation of national organizations. Make sure you take a look at the United Nations. We're going to talk about the World Bank. And of course, all of this is going to lead us up to the Cold War. I think I'll save the Nuremberg trials for the next segment, which shouldn't be too terribly long. But the United Nations is going to be formed because, again, the epic fail of the League of Nations not being able to keep us out of World War II. So a new internal structure will be formed, and I'll have a worksheet for you on the United Nations so that you can answer that and become more familiar with what's going on there.